On August 10th, 2019, the world awoke to headlines that would ignite a firestorm of speculation and controversy. Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced financier and convicted sex offender with ties to presidents, royalty, and the global elite, was dead in his Manhattan jail cell. Once a teacher, now turned into a Wall Street power broker, Epstein's life was defined by wealth, influence, and ultimately by the dark shadow of his decades-long abuse of underage girls. A ring of depravity and abuse that would eventually catch up with him in the summer of 2019. The official story was that Epstein committed suicide in his high-security jail cell, but when it came to light that the cameras had stopped working and that no prison guards were on patrol during this time, many rumors and controversial theories began to spread regarding the death of Jeffrey Epstein. Had he been silenced by those in power, scared of what he might reveal to the public and the courts? Or was it truly the actions of a man filled with despair and dread about what his future held, that he felt it best to end his own life rather than deal with the consequences of his actions? Well, in this video we will be doing a deep dive into everything we know about the events leading up to, during, and after the death of Jeffrey Epstein, so we can determine the truth behind the passing of this depraved billionaire. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the mystery and controversy surrounding the deaths of the rich and famous, then subscribe to my channel, Famous Exit. Epstein's legal troubles began in earnest in 2005 when Palm Beach police launched an investigation into allegations that Epstein may have molested a 14-year-old child, and over the next several years, the evidence against Epstein would continue to grow and develop, revealing a sprawling network of abuse with dozens of girls being assaulted by Epstein and his associates. And when Epstein would at last be convicted for his crimes in 2008, he would enter a highly controversial plea deal which would see him serving only 13 months in a county jail. However, though, the outrage over this leniency simmered for a decade until July 2019, when Epstein would again be arrested by federal agents at Teterboro Airport on new sex trafficking charges, and these new charges meant that there was a strong possibility of Epstein spending the rest of his life behind bars. Epstein would plead not guilty and be denied bail, setting the stage for a trial that would never come to fruition. The final hours of Jeffrey Epstein's life are a study in unanswered questions and procedural chaos. On the evening of August 9th, 2019, Epstein returned to the Special Housing Unit of the Metropolitan Correctional Center after meeting with his lawyers, reportedly in high spirits. But as night fell, the safeguards that were put in place to prevent him from self-harming inexplicably collapsed, as only 2 weeks earlier, on July 23rd, Jeffrey Epstein was found semi-conscious in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, with marks around his neck prompting speculation that he had attempted suicide or had been attacked. He was discovered in a fetal position on the floor by prison staff and briefly treated at a hospital before being placed on suicide watch. However, despite the seriousness of the event, Epstein was taken off suicide watch after only 6 days, and he is placed under less rigorous psychiatric observation known as Special Housing Unit Watch. Therefore, it was very obvious from the middle of July that Epstein was at high risk of self-harm, or someone was definitely trying to silence him permanently, which makes the events leading up to his death on August 10 very suspicious, to say the least. Firstly, Epstein's cellmate was transferred out and not replaced, leaving Epstein all alone in his cell. Secondly, the guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes failed to do so, instead falling asleep for nearly 3 hours and later falsifying records to cover their absence. And lastly, 2 security cameras outside Epstein's cell malfunctioned and did not record anything on the day of his apparent suicide, and a third camera produced completely unusable footage. And at dawn, Epstein was found unresponsive with a strip of bedsheet tied around his neck and his body cold and lifeless. Paramedics were called and they rushed him to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead at 6:39 a.m. The catalog of failures on the night of Epstein's death reads like a checklist of what should never happen in a high-profile federal detention center, and it just seems far too improbable for all these mishaps to be just a simple coincidence. Not only was Epstein left alone despite a recent suicide attempt, but the guards neglected their rounds, surveillance cameras failed for inexplicable reasons, and basic procedures for monitoring at-risk inmates were completely ignored. Attorney General William Barr would describe the situation as a perfect storm of screw-ups, a sentiment echoed by lawmakers and the public alike. The official cause of death determined by the New York City medical examiner was suicide by hanging, but this finding was immediately challenged by Epstein's lawyers and by Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist hired by the family, who argued that certain fractures in Epstein's neck were more consistent with homicidal strangulation rather than suicide. The absence of a cellmate, the timing of the guards' neglect, and the lack of clear surveillance footage only further strengthened Epstein's lawyer's argument that their client's death was no simple suicide but a murder by those in power who wanted him to be silenced permanently. To this day, the autopsy of Jeffrey Epstein remains a focal point for those who believe Epstein's death was not self-inflicted but most certainly a homicide. As Dr. Michael Baden would release the following in a statement on October 30, 2019, arguing that Epstein's neck injuries were much more consistent with homicidal strangulation rather than suicide, as Epstein had 2 fractures on the left and right sides of his larynx, as well as 1 fracture on the left hyoid bone above the Adam's apple. Baden claimed that the way Epstein's hyoid bone was broken was indicative of strangulation from behind rather than someone jumping from the top of a bunk. News of Epstein's death was met with disbelief and suspicion all across the world, and the phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" became highly trending across all social media platforms. And his death became a meme that captured the widespread skepticism many people held of the official narrative of Epstein perishing from suicide. Online polls revealed that only a small fraction of Americans believed Epstein died by suicide, with many convinced he was murdered to silence him before he could implicate powerful associates. Others speculated that his death was staged and that Epstein had been spirited away, and it is no surprise that with the sheer number of procedural failures, combined with Epstein's connections to figures at the highest levels of power, that many people would begin to support and develop conspiracy theories which would better explain the shocking manner in which Epstein passed. I personally don't believe the conspiracy theory that Epstein may have faked his own death, as the evidence points towards a more brutal and permanent methodology, and I strongly suspect that Epstein was murdered to ensure he could not incriminate the highly influential individuals who had joined him in assaulting underage girls. So where does the case stand now? Well, with Epstein's death, the criminal case against him was dismissed, but the search to hold someone accountable for the injustices faced by these young girls did not end with his passing, as attention quickly shifted from Epstein to his alleged co-conspirators, most notably Ghislaine Maxwell, who was arrested in July 2020 and later convicted on multiple counts of sex trafficking and conspiracy for her role in procuring underage girls for Epstein. Civil lawsuits from Epstein's victims continue to wind through the courts even to this day, targeting his estate and other associates' wealth and possessions. However, no new breakthroughs have been made in regards to the homicide of Epstein, and the only charges given in regards to the security failures leading up to his death have been the 2 guards that were on duty of the night of his presumed suicide. Tova Noel and Michael Thomas were later charged with falsifying records. But other than these minor charges, the question of who else may have been involved in Epstein's suspicious death remains a subject of ongoing investigation and public fascination. Jeffrey Epstein's death closed the book on one of the most notorious criminal cases of the 21st century, but it left behind a legacy of mistrust, outrage, and unanswered questions. Was it suicide as the authorities claim, or was it something far more sinister? Why did so many protocols fail at once, and who, if anyone, benefited from Epstein's silence? As the world continues to grapple with the fallout, one thing is certain: the full truth of what happened in that jail cell most likely will never be known by the wider public. So I really hope you found this video to be engaging and educational, and if you did enjoy it, please do like and share this video with others. And let me know in the comments down below which other celebrity's death you would like for me to cover next. And also, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the controversies and mysteries behind the deaths of the rich and famous, then subscribe to my channel, Famous Exit. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.